Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the Project Ready podcast today. Very excited to have our guests, Sala and Jeff, on, who will have themselves introduce themselves in a moment to discuss the challenges of the owner. The owner pays for everything. The owner is on the legal hook if this built asset fails or is not compliant. And so there are particular challenges for the owner that the industry has to address because, for one, the owner needs their own systems and their own ways to deal with data and to reduce risk. But also, you work with owners, right? So you have to understand their pain in order to understand how you can serve them better, which is better for your business. I have an adage that if you want to negotiate a contract with somebody, the first thing you do is understand their position. If you understand their position, it becomes much easier to then advocate for yourself. And so in similar kind, it's the owner. Previous podcasts we do touch on all these things overlap. And so we did a modular world, which is building the enterprise through a modular approach, which Sala was on. We've done AI garbage in, garbage out, which we had both Sala and Jeff. We had the fortune to have both of you on. So with that, let me take a quick pause. And if you guys would introduce yourselves.
Go ahead, Sala.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Joe, for having me and Jeff on the podcast as a guest again today. It's super exciting to be talking about owners' perspective in construction projects and owners' representatives' perspective as someone that is supporting owners achieve what they want to achieve with the overall project team. So thank you for having me.
And good morning, everyone, as well. And yes, as well, thanks, Joe, for the invite. And looking forward to this conversation. Hi, everyone. Jeff Walter from AECOM. I'm a digital consulting lead for the Canada region here, sitting in Toronto, Canada. And this subject is really exciting. Having worked with owners in the AEC industry from a number of different lenses, both from a design delivery perspective, but also from a consulting perspective. And, we're seeing lots of digital transformation happening at the owner level. So happy to get into a lot of the discussion and challenges around that.
And then I realized I didn't really actually introduce myself or Shaylee, who's on the call today. So I'm Joe Gigrich. I'm the founder and CEO of ProjectReady. And Shaylee is our head of development. And as I often put it, the mother of ProjectReady. All right. It's true, though. It's funny because it's true. So let's take a step back for a moment and let's discuss even what an owner is. And I'll take my take at it. An owner is more than the person who owns the deed to the land. And for me, as it relates to addressing owner challenges, it's the program manager, the project manager, often the construction manager, they're owner reps. So the owner for me is a big O. It's a bigger and more inclusive bucket. But then again, there's the actual owner, the municipality, the people who built the building. So let me put it out there to you guys. How do you define an owner? I know it sounds pedestrian, but
yeah, I mean, I guess from there is definitely a few kind of lenses to that, and it it can be different depending on the type of, I guess, kind of infrastructure or kind of buildings or places that are being delivered. So whether that's a public or kind of a private kind of owner kind of scenario. But I guess the owner in our perspective is, the roll up to the kind of top, and I guess the responsibility from an overall budget and quality and delivery perspective. And of course, I think, really important steering, I guess, an overall governance and kind of framework for really, from a digital perspective, just having kind of a better experience for all of the projects and programs within an owner kind of portfolio. So there's definitely a lot of responsibility, I would say, kind of on an owner's shoulder, and it means a lot. But they're really the governance over kind of how kind of programs and projects roll out.
Yeah, Jeff nailed it. I'll summarize my perspective to an owner is that the owner is whoever party has accountability on the project, meaning that they have a financial stake to either lose or win with, and that is the owner. That someone that is investing money into the project and then taking the risk of it. as well. And sometimes ownership can be a very short-term investment. Sometimes it's a very long-term build-to-own type of ownership. But whoever is putting their money on the table, that's the owner. That's how I define an owner.
It's a very New York view that I can agree with. It's who puts up the cash, right? It's really what it comes down to.
Well, it is. I mean, that's an interesting kind of question, because I mean, I didn't want to say that kind of straight out myself, that financial was such a big component of it, but it is definitely something that underlines all the idea of owners, for sure. But we do have definitely scenarios where we do have more public-private kind of types of infrastructure and project delivery where the money actually is coming from different potential places, and that could be private equity or kind of bigger, where they're financing more long-term kind of infrastructure building opportunities. So I mean, in a delivery perspective, that wouldn't necessarily be an owner. So there's a variety of different kind of perspectives on that, but I do think you guys are right that financial is kind of really at the heart of an owner's commitment to.
To add to what Jeff is defining it, that's why I use the term accountability, that there's the financial responsibility, and that way when there are multiple owners and investors included, and especially when talking about public entities that they have taxpayers' money that they have to manage, then it's the accountability that is their responsibility.
I totally agree.
And that's where it's the financial perspective.
Yeah, that makes full sense, because if it's a private enterprise with several investors, it's a holdco. That's the owner. If it's a P3 project where you have private capital, somebody's building a bridge, AECom wants to take on, put up some of the money because they'll get some of the receipts. It's still the municipality that is the ultimate owner, even though they have a shared financial stake. And I would imagine that would also somewhat complicate ownership at large. Like in our case, for us, what we serve on the owner, one of the big things is data ownership and transparency, right? This is one of the things that we really push on. But does not having a mixed pool of financial interests, does that create its own specific challenges as it relates to owner needs?
I would say absolutely. I think in general, the idea of ownership is definitely getting more complex, and that certainly presents kind of the unique data challenges around management of not only data but systems as well, and to give the right kind of really kind of performance tracking to kind of create that accountability, whoever kind of that owner kind of model is, in a sense. So definitely, as again, just from my own background of kind of larger scale kind of infrastructure delivery, as those get bigger and those get more complex, these are definitely challenges that reveal itself at the owner level, for sure.
Yeah, and even that data ownership, right? A lot of this, the owner needs to trust the people that they're working with, that they're forking over the cash to, right? But to your point, Jeff and Sala, if you have multiple financial stakeholders, you have to have a way, as it relates to the way they interact and the information they share, that they trust that as well, right? Even amongst themselves. And I would argue that's, as there are more financial entities involved, even that trust becomes somewhat compounded.
Yes, and on that note, with the complexity of the ownership models and the different lengths of how long a different stakeholder and entity is part of the ownership model, that's why I developed the digital building lifecycle, that we need to have a way of capturing who was part of the project at what point in time and what was their role. Were they the owner, or were they the author of the data, or were they the manager of the data, or someone that was allowed to look at the data or even make changes to it? But it all needs to be somehow recorded. And I guess blockchain technology might be one of the solutions that you have the stamped mark somewhere in the history, that who was doing what and who approved it. And that way, when it's really complex and there are long chains of ownership, then we know who's involved and where the money is coming from, or where the money is going to.
And the liability.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what a lot of that comes down to. I mean, you mentioned timestamps and authoritative information. That is most important if there's a lawsuit, right? Am I incorrect?
Yeah, I mean, the legality and the traceability and auditability is definitely one thing, but even coming back to that trust there, which, sets the tone really for kind of a legal kind of, framework on a particular project or whatever. I'm definitely also kind of seeing the maturity on the owner side in terms of, yes, getting more open book type of contracts, in a sense that really, are kind of pushing the industry to be able to, as Salah suggested, collect more and curate more granular information, documentation that supports work and time that's being invoiced for. And I'm not saying necessarily this will ever become kind of a true open book in a sense, but there's definitely a maturing kind of um, maturity in the owner environment where we're seeing kind of more accountability even on AECOM's side in terms of how we present our timesheets and invoices, and demonstrating in different ways how we create value for the work that we're consulting for. And so these are really important kind of foundational things, as you guys have talked about, in terms of developing that trust narrative. And with that having the support from a systems perspective, like you said, Joe, being able to then kind of create more value on the traceability, auditability, and kind of fitting into kind of the legal, setting within a particular project or program.
Yeah, the open book, the trust comes from visibility, right? And so that is one of the challenges that we see from our perspective. It's the visibility into information in a way that's distributed, that is timely, that is governed, right? Because you don't want to fork over information that you should not, or that's premature. And then, with that, the challenges, and I would ask you guys to weigh in on the difference between, in terms of challenges, between data ownership, authorship, and data management. Want to pick that up?
Yeah, I'll pick this one because it's something that we were having really deep discussions when I started my career in this industry, and digital tools and visual databases were coming, and people started realizing that more and more data is going to be delivered or managed in a digital format rather than paper documents and archives. And that's where things got really interesting very quickly, because people didn't have clarity on who owns the digital representation of the building, when the physical building has a very clear owner, but then the digital building doesn't necessarily have, and the digital building has multiple different authors, but then you have people that are managing and updating the data during the digital building lifecycle and the technical lifecycle of the physical building. So when thinking about the future projects and the projects of today, it's something that needs to be defined in the project contracts and into the project execution plans, that who is the owner of the data, so that they have clarity on what responsibilities they have as the owner. But then they need to define who is the author of the data, and if that is the original designer or engineer, that they have certain rights or responsibilities. But then it doesn't necessarily last once changes start to happen. And then if someone is the manager for the data, that it doesn't give them the author rights, so they can't just go and make changes based on what the owner wants to do if they don't have the author rights into the physical building itself and the digital representation of it. And then someone might have just your rights, that they should have that transparency that you were talking about, Joe, so they can make decisions or continue doing their processes. So there are multiple stakeholders that we are now seeing come into the digital world of built environment industry that haven't been clearly defined before because they haven't pre-existed. And now there are legal aspects into things, especially knowing that some designers have lifetime rights into their design, and any changes that happen into the physical structure or the physical design need to be approved by them. And that's how they've contracted it decades ago. So do we have similar situations in the future that someone wants to make changes into the digital representation of a building to make it into a digital twin, for example? That do they have the right to do it, or do they need to have a consensus as a group to then implement it?
Yeah, it makes sense, because if you design something that is bleeding edge and somebody else goes in and mucks it up, you as the original author might get sued. Again, I mean, everything is money and lawsuits here, but that is a huge consequence of it. And I can say that on the data ownership side, it's really where we cut our teeth. So off of our services organization, and this is pedestrian, but we see it all over the place, right? So we were working for major cereal manufacturer. They were using a very large competitor to like AECom and OAC. And what they had told us outright was, by using the vendor system, which was ProjectWise, every time they had a billing dispute or an argument or anything, that consulting firm would hold back their deliverables, their designs, their as-built as such. And so that during that period, we had largely a SharePoint practice back in the day. The desired end state was that they had a way to funnel all the as-built and the like into SharePoint as a place of record, because that data ownership was, how should I say it, compounded, and in real world, people were holding their hostage, their data hostage, basically.
Yeah, it's. I think that's definitely been something that's been in our industry for a while, in terms of those silos. You know, those are really kind of outcomes of having silos of information, you know, through different phases of projects, and you know, between the client and different stakeholders, etc. And you know, that world is obviously changing quite a bit with, you know, the integration that's really required across organization project environments to deliver really any type of project now. So there is, you know, it's an interesting topic for sure. And as projects do and programs do get bigger and larger scale, and you know, as the private kind of capital kind of starts to infuse into the industry, those risks, you know, do get higher and higher, and the traceability and the auditability and the ability to trace back decisions becomes even more critical to a successful kind of delivery. But there is, you know, as you guys, Sala, you know, you mentioned, there's a reality to this project delivery world, where we do have to operate with multi different authoring kind of environments and different softwares that need to connect to each other. And there's the reality of that versus, you know, at the owner level, needing to, have some record that is stable and core that they can rely on, that they know can never and be trusted from a legal and traceability perspective. So, you know, it's a very interesting kind of place where, you know, you've got a lot of information, you know, at our highest volumes yet, being authored in multiple different places, and being, you know, I think ISO 19650, Sal, I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of how that, you know, helps support even kind of, you know, the governance over this kind of data strategy here. But definitely we're seeing at an owner level the desire to retain some data residency and some connection to every process and every document, you know, Joe, as you mentioned, kind of connected to a project or a program. So figuring out all that data architecture and the automation of that is, you know, definitely is on the owner's minds these days.
And I'm remiss in bringing Shaylee into this conversation, and it's not the worst pivot either, is that, okay, so data ownership, data authorship, data management, this is implicitly governance. We all know that all that information will span many systems. Even from the owner, their system of record may be ACC and SharePoint. It may be a combination. So Shaylee, from a technical perspective, what do you see some of the ways to resolve that and some of the challenges that remain?
Yeah, it's just definitely interesting to hear all these different sides. I think from a technical perspective, one of the biggest challenges I've seen just kind of working through all of these different systems is there is no particular standard in place. And even in terms of the quality of the data, I think it's very important. It's not just about bringing it together, because we've seen different systems where they just kind of do a drop off with just a whole Excel file of data, which is just not manageable. Even if we get that data into one system, I think it's the format of the data, it's the way the data comes in together, which would then make it more like technically viable to then report against, or just make that in a usable format, which when we need to kind of pull out all of that information. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges, the way, because the data is needed, people are kind of sending around just in email attachments, Excel files, the data kind of moves around in such ungoverned fashion. There needs to be like something that is more governed in a more proper data regulated format to just be able to report against it properly.
Yeah, I mean, even on the larger level, outside of like spreadsheets and the like,
Mhm.
in conversations with customers, they go, "Oh, we have a data warehouse," and instead of throwing a whole bunch of documents into Dropbox, they're throwing a whole bunch of SQL and Oracle queries into a database. That's still not really doing much, right? Because I think your point, Shaylee, is you really do
Mhm.
need a taxonomy that establishes a standard.
Yeah, it's a lot of data to sift through if it's not properly organized, because in different systems, it's managed differently, stored differently. So even if we try to pull that together, it's definitely a difficult challenge to kind of bring it all together.
And one of the underpinnings of garbage in, garbage out, our previous
Yeah,
webcast about
exactly.
AI,
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
It's
definitely.
nice you have a whole bucket of data. It's like having, say, look at all this stuff in my closet. Can you find anything?
Mhm.
Basically, the idea is if you do data right at the beginning, it's going to have a significant impact on everything.
Right. And that it stops there. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we'll just get all the data. And it's something that you had referenced earlier too, Sala, was having this data plan up front, right?
Mm.
What are the standards? What are the
Mhm.
interchange? It's not just dumping data.
Exactly, and like Jeff and Charlie mentioned the ISO 19650 and the quality of data and how it can be reused. Those are the foundation for people to choose the tools that they want to use for their own business. Because some of the solutions that are out there are kind of an overkill for companies that are not too large yet but are on the growth trajectory, and some tools are too simple for a bigger corporation that needs to do more with the data that they are collecting and managing. So that's why we literally need the global standards and the international and national standards, so that we all have the same rules and regulations, or the law for delivering the data and managing the data, and that way give the flexibility to the end users to choose that which tools do they want to choose and use, so that they are not locked into an ecosystem that they don't need or they no longer need. And from the end user perspective and from the client perspective, they're being held hostage with legacy systems because they can't transition into something that is more advanced or a better suited fit for them. It's because it's the data management problem for them, that they never followed any like internationally recognized data standard, but their IT department created some way of collecting the data into an Excel file, and that's how they've been running their business. And now they can't transition because it's too big of a lift, and nobody knows what they're looking in.
And even above and beyond Excel, I mean, not to speak ill of my brethren, right? But there's a certain amount of laziness, I think, in some of these companies where they go, let's pick one application, one monolithic thing. May not work for this group, may not work for that other group, but we got all our data together in a way that's meaningless because those other groups will not participate. And the fidelity of the data, which still has to be matched with other external systems, is not addressed.
I guess just one other kind of layer to add in here, and I guess the whole principle of ISO 19650 in terms of the lifecycle kind of components of that compliance structure or framework there is that it's one thing definitely on the design and construction side, the number of kind of challenges in terms of delivering infrastructure. But Salah, as you and I know, like being involved with, kind of standardization on that handoff between a construction phase into operations and maintenance, and the whole digital twin industry and metaverse industry. These issues even become more complex, but also more required to kind of have that full life cycle plan, right? And from an owner view, really, of course, we're seeing it, the maturity of ISO 19650, the implementation in particular in North America, from an owner level, it's still maturing, but there is this ethos that, there's the maturity into life cycle type of thinking. And because of that, that just triggers the importance of these kind of data planning and governance frameworks that we're talking about here. So it's not just kind of like the start point, but the start point also kind of needs to, see the whole life cycle long view as well.
And I think the other thing with owners, to your point, Jeff, they're becoming more sophisticated now.
Mm-hmm.
You just get this haunting sense that back in the day, which is not that long ago, owners like, we put up the money, give me the building, don't really want to hear about it, if you will, right? We hired you to do this, is inadequate for an owner to protect their own interests. They have to participate in the game. They have to have their own data strategies and plans in place to intersect with everybody's individual data plans. And then to your point, Salah, the overarching one, which I think I know the answer, but that overarching plan, who provides that? Is that the vendor that was hired on behalf of the owner? Is it the owner themselves that should come up with that? I understand it will be a collaboration, but let me throw that at you guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think it kind of also depends where you are in the world as well in terms of maturity of kind of the owner world.
19650 is it's the owner, right?
It is. And but I've, certainly seen in kind of the Canadian market, the requirements for that kind of compliance on large infrastructure delivery. But in terms of the full auditable kind of process that goes with that, which is very complex and requires, and Salah definitely probably even more richer experience than mine, but definitely requires a lot of documentation and planning, and governance that were kind of described here. So, I've seen kind of owners, kind of transition into kind of and agree to the principles of ISO 19650 and implement certain function like BIM handoff, for example, more kind of defined process on adding classification to BIM models as they're moving through different phases, etc. The different quality kind of review process. So there is some governance kind of that's emerging, but it's still, I think, a long way to go in terms of the full kind of implementation of ISO 19650 across, at least in North America. Salah, maybe from an international perspective, I know there's pockets where it is more mature, for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking that have I even ever come across this question before? Because all the different stakeholders, they're always hurrying up to wait on any construction project that they are in the decision-making times and the overall total project lead times are always so long that people have already transitioned from that original organization to somewhere else and even beyond. So then how do you keep everyone on the same track when the owners don't necessarily have the deep understanding of the digital construction technologies and capabilities? So they really kind of ask the experts that, what would you do? What would be beneficial? And their perspective is what's in it for them, what's beneficial for them. So they never kind of touch base on what's in it for the overall project team. And that's where we need more collaboration and more discussion and thought. Because I've sat in like planning meetings for creating BIM execution plans, and people have been arguing about naming conventions for 8 months, and it's that type of reality out there, because everyone is just trying to get their own stuff done and then move on. But with the new national BIM standard that is being published by NIBS here in the United States, I think we are taking the steps towards the right direction, that we can now have a longer perspective into what are we actually trying to deliver. Is it the physical building, or is the physical building and its digital representation, and for what purposes? And then now that the AI is emerging on multiple fronts, then starting to think about what might that do for the benefit of people that don't have the time or the knowledge to absorb it all and then make the final decisions. Nobody has the time or even the lifetime to capture everything. There's too much data and information to think about, but AI could do some of the processing for us and then present the most feasible options, and kind of carve a little bit of the core process in front of us, so that we don't end up making decisions that just lead to a dead end or only serve our own purposes. So that's something that is very new for the built environment industry, that we've been very local before, and now we are becoming global, local, because a lot of the investors are coming from outside of our national borders. So then they have their own data governance that they've been using. So they have all these ideas of how they would do things for the projects that they own. And that's the challenge, that how do we become more digitally mature and digital ready? Because the whole game is now changing with the emerging technologies.
And throwing on the technical side, if you will, I mean, in our own small way, it still comes down to data, having data, curating data, and making sense of data for AI again, and all these other things to work. And, and you mentioned that, 8 months of arguing on nomenclature. That, I would argue, is what APIs and databases are for, so that everybody can call it what they want, but some way to map that content, map that information, automate that naming convention in a way that everybody can make sense. So again, I just want to pivot back to Shaylee for a second. Would you pick up on that?
Yeah, I was definitely listening to both Jeff and Sarah, thinking that it's really important in this case. I was just thinking about the way we handle metadata. So it's not just the naming convention, but there are so many aspects around the data. And metadata is a great way to kind of bring things together. And just kind of leading on to what Sala was mentioning about AI and then digital twins. So all of this metadata properties, if they are kind of tagged properly and stored properly, just going forward, I feel based on the type of a project, AI would be greatly useful. And if we have 100 data points that we are tracking, to kind of just even guide the users on scanning the documents automatically, setting all of this metadata and just helping standardize that in a better way.
Yeah, then you don't get into nomenclature wars, because that's one thing the industry is, how shall I say, overly fond of, is concatenation.
Yep. Yeah, by separating it out, having metadata properties, it just gives a much better way to then have the AI tools learn that, okay, with these kind of data, these are the different data points, and that kind of feeds in a much better fashion, I feel.
All right. So I guess, just turning it back over to the larger group here. So what are some of the ways to address those challenges? Everything from, and we've referenced a number here, but everything from making sure you have governance and data plans up front. But anyway, I want to turn it back to you guys.
Well, I'm hopeful that the built environment industry would start collaborating more with the materials and products industry and the manufacturing industry, because a lot of the data that we have to deal with in order to verify that the design and the engineering of a solution actually functions and delivers what the owners want to pay for, etc. The data has already been created, but it's being created outside of our industry. And it's somehow unattainable for us, that we then try to recapture it from all kinds of specs and documentations and re-input it. That maybe there is a broader opportunity for collaboration across different industries, so that we start collecting the digital supply chain much earlier on, and enable the original authors of that original data related to the specific material or a product to be engaged in populating the databases that we then need, and create a separation of what are the designers and engineers for, what are the construction teams for, rather than add a task of data input, data output onto everyone's plate. So that's what I'm hoping for, that we can actually start more collaboration and cooperation rather than have the separation of different industries that are actually connected.
That makes sense. I mean, it's brute force labor of low value for what's in a tight labor market as well.
I'll add another kind of challenge, kind of in the whole complexity of kind of the data, the data framework that we're kind of talking about here, and that is time. And what or at least what I'm been seeing at the owner level is, there is this. Obviously in the U.S. that's kind of emerging now, but in other areas around the world, infrastructure stimulus that's resulted in kind of downstream kind of big infrastructure programs being delivered these days, and it's really putting a pressure on owners to, I mean, within the next 0 to 10 years, as these kind of this new infrastructure wave kind of emerges. There's a real fear, in a sense, that if the current standards and setups and governance and plans, everything that we're talking about here, are not in place, that could result in some probably painful capital delivery programs. So there is a bit of a pressure on the industry, and with that comes the pressure of transformation. And coming down to the owner level in terms of organizational change and culture change, and really taking a digital strategy that maybe needs acceleration, or maybe you can't go through kind of a 3-year kind of program to transform how you operate as an organization. It needs to be a bit more agile as you're delivering infrastructure. So there's really a kind of a pressure and kind of a time pressure to kind of digital transformation, and with that data transformation. And I think, accelerated, and I'll kind of plug, I guess, ProjectReady in a sense for.
Thank you. I was about to. So there you go.
And in terms of how owners would typically kind of be looking for methodologies for doing that faster, really, and addressing kind of the more modular. And I'm sure that kind of came out of the last podcast there. Incremental change. These kind of concepts are phased in kind of change management types of ideas. Is really kind of an interesting kind of growth in terms of a mentality for owner level. So there's a pressure, but also acknowledging that they need to do it right.
Right. So, and that they do need an accelerator, right? Because, not just a shameful plug for what we do, which is what we do, right? We sort of automate the creation of a data warehouse and relationships. But I think the challenge that you have in getting, to your point, nobody wants to spend 3 years. You need governance plans. You need the formality. But if it takes too long, it's like end user adoption. If it takes too many clicks on an app, nobody will use the app. Mm-hmm. And all these projects, it's hurry up and wait. All of a sudden they get the funding, and then they're behind schedule. And there's this huge rush, my observation, to get the things going. Mm-hmm. So yes, you need the formality, but you do need accelerators. And I absolutely agree with you. I think everything is agile these days to a reasonable extent, but as long as you put in bumper guards, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. As I talk a blue streak and the like. So if it's appropriate for you guys, one of the things that I'd really love to hear from you, I don't know if you can name names, as they say, but any real world examples of where there's been challenges, any solutions therein, like some of your own customer experiences, if you will, what's worked and what hasn't. I hear everybody breathing. I don't know if this is something that y'all are comfortable discussing.
It's a good question, but it's it kind of runs a Rolodex in the head that where the successes have happened have always been where there has been high trust amongst the project teams, and people have genuinely collaborated and tried to level up everyone rather than just fight for their own preference or something that is beneficial for them only, regardless of what it causes for others. But the complexity of projects these days is what is always kind of throwing the curveball at everyone, that there are so many different stakeholders, and the amount is just continuously increasing, and people are brought on board at different points in time. So then like onboarding in offboarding different stakeholders from the same project is the trick. But otherwise, I'd say that like technology is ready, but the challenge is that how ready are people, and what the different digital maturity of organizations are, and what are the transition plans now that we have a tremendous amount of knowledge retiring. And I've spoken about this a lot, and it's not to be mean at everyone. I value people that have had long careers, but they are now leaving and they're not necessarily coming back. And the new generations of people, they have not necessarily been exposed to a lot of the complexities of projects that they are inheriting, because there hasn't been enough room on the projects to bring on board more junior people. The project budgets hasn't allowed that. So now it's the challenge is at the people level. That are people motivated for the digital transformation, and do they see the value in the current hype, or is it that they are choosing to skip this one and wait what comes next? And the speed of technology evolution is just increasing all the time, and the amount of tools that are available is overwhelming. And that's why the data master plan is something that I really thought deeply about, that if we had a better foundation, as like a standard foundation for the industry, for every organization to start building their own guidelines on top of, and the playbooks on top of, and let go of their own company standards, because they're not standards anymore. Standards are national or international or global, and everything that is a individual organization solution is a guideline, it's a playbook. So we need to switch our mindsets and be comfortable with kind of putting the 20, 30 years of governance plans and systems plans aside, and kind of restart from scratch, hit the reset.
Entrenchment is not a standard, okay? And I think that's what you're alluding to. Is there's a lot of entrenched ways of doing things in organizations which are absolutely inward looking. And I can tell you that even, I come from a professional services background. Our best projects are when we have a great relationship with the client, we're sharing data, I believe in open book. Those are our most successful projects. They're best on budget, best quality of delivery, and you really do need that trust and that collaboration, which I do believe younger folk, I mean, I'm in my 60s, but everybody's a sort of an edge case, if you will, are much more comfortable collaborating, and particularly on cloud and online technology.
Yeah, I can just bring up two examples from, as you guys are definitely talking here, kind of fitting into that, and not specific examples, but I think one of the catalysts, there's many different catalysts that are going to force those changes, generational changes, those types of things. One of the catalysts that I feel has always been a factor, and especially over the last 5 years, has been alternative delivery, right? And the way that infrastructure and projects are delivered, the contract frameworks for that. And more, those types of new, untraditional kind of contracts, collaboration is at the foundation of those, right? And that, we see those as significant components of evaluations on major infrastructure proposals these days, is that collaboration component, actually evaluating how we collaborate as a team, not only the people side, but certainly on the systems side as well. So, and in particular, within the alternative delivery kind of types of contract, there's all different types of frameworks. We've seen like design, build, finance, and traditional P3 and alliance. But the one that I'm kind of really, I think is going to reveal kind of the integrated kind of data planning and kind of frameworks here is this progressive design build type of contract where risk is really kind of mitigated across the owner, contractor, designer kind of contract. It's a completely different way of delivering infrastructure where you spend the first conceptual design stage, some definition phase, delivering a design that has a certain target. And we kind of get into terminology like target design and target pricing. And, coming back to this accountability at the owner level, accountability in terms of data, is becoming, more real-time requirements. The monthly kind of board meetings, getting PowerPoint presentations, seeing how performance are kind of out the window. And we're needing real-time performance tracking on almost a weekly basis in terms of, how teams are measuring up to those target designs and that target kind of construction costs. And so the types of contracts, like the more collaborative they get, the more requirements for fully functioning data systems and architecture.
Yeah, my contention on this, Jeff. I don't see the difference between technology and people. I really, I'm a cyborg kind of guy, but it's true, right? We've had pacemakers for a long time. There's an absolute intersection of human effort and technology. And I think that's also one of the other challenges that has to be overridden is that cultural view. Well, I'm a smart person. I've done this forever. I know I have my skill set, but you're not divorced from technology. Right. That is absolutely the evolution of the human race, beginning with fire. All right. That's my pontification, but
yeah.
All right. I think we've gotten through a pretty long list here. Any closing thoughts or probably not? Just throwing it out there.
Thank you so much for having us on today's episode, Joe. Always a pleasure, Charlie and Jeff. This was amazing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Thanks, Joe, for organizing. Shaylee, Salah, definitely always wonderful talking with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and my view is I'm only come off as smart because I have smarter friends. So I do appreciate your participation here today.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks.